Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of May, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by Alex Thomson, bringing us Eastern Approaches from the Netherlands, also Vanessa Beeley and Debi Evans. So we've got a packed news today.
We'll get straight on then with, the British government has announced £300 million, another £300 million tranche of military aid, in inverted commas, to support Ukraine's ongoing defence against Russia's illegal invasion. This was announced, of course, when Boris was speaking to the Ukrainian parliament yesterday. We'll come on to that in a little bit in a second or so. But this is apparently including radar equipment, heavy lift drones, and thousands of night vision devices. So there you go. But the question is, Brian, how has Ukraine been betrayed?
Well, of course, the weapons are a key part of it because it's too little, too late. But what we thought we'd do today is just a very simple overview, which we have taken from all the information we can get at the moment. Let's have a look at how this thing has built up. What has the West done? So we're going to say stage one was to take control of Ukrainian politics. And obviously key to this was the fact that the US and the UK in particular got stuck into Ukraine and helped to ramp up the troubles in 2014. And I'm going to say, as I work through this, we'll certainly be asking Alex and Vanessa whether this fits the impression they've got of the dirty dealings of the West. But that's the key thing. 2014, everything gets turned upside down in Ukraine. No question that the US and the UK had a dirty hand in that. We then get Zelensky into power. And what is he? Well, he's a Western-backed comedian puppet. I don't think we can describe him any better than that. The man has no qualifications to do the job he's doing, except that he's clearly in bed with the West, who think he's some form of saint. Then we had the semi-covert takeover of Ukrainian state media. And of course, the British government heavily involved with that, but they used BBC Media Action on the front end. And once that transformation of Ukrainian media was complete, then Western policy could be flooded into the population of Ukraine. We've then got the rebranding of the extreme Nazi political agenda as acceptable. So the BBC felt full well how dangerous that Nazi element was, but they simply airbrushed it away along with Ukrainian crimes in the Donbass and indeed across Ukraine itself, where they attacked their own citizens. If we go into stage two, that was to foment an increasingly anti-Russia line. So we'll bring in as point 5, use the UK, US and EU media to inflate Ukrainian confidence to believe that Ukraine is an accepted part of the EU and NATO club. And I think Zelensky would have been very susceptible to this because he was led to believe he was one of the big boys when clearly he's not. They ramped up Ukrainian confidence that they could do no wrong in their increasingly aggressive anti-Russian rhetoric and military posturing. So this was really sowing the seeds for war. Then they encouraged the West and NATO, the EU has encouraged war by leading Ukraine to believe that they can win against Russian military action. And I think this is an absolutely key point. Into stage 3, we're then using Ukraine as proxy cannon fodder, well, reality cannon fodder, but a proxy war for the West's real agenda, which is to weaken the Russian regime and to achieve regime change in Russia. This has been very clearly stated. So when the war starts to bite at an early stage, many of the really good commentators are saying, if you have a look into the negotiations in Turkey, the Ukrainians were starting to move and be sensible, but then it's clear a lot of pressure from the West to stop them moving into a more positive series of negotiations with Russia. 9, we deceive Ukraine into believing that NATO is going to fight the war as their saviour. And 10, the key bit here, Mike, the weapons and munitions come in, but it's too little and it's too late. So we've now reached the stage where Ukraine is failing. The infrastructure is now shot to pieces, literally. And we know that the good Ukrainian troops are taking heavy losses. But where do we go? Well, stage 4, we've got to prolong the war. We're going to ignore the Ukrainian suffering. And this is because the real attack is on Russia itself. And of course, as the war gets prolonged, we drive up the Ukrainian military and civilian deaths and casualties. And we've got these repeated false claims that they can win against Russia when the evidence from the battlefield is very clear now that they're losing, and ultimately they're going to lose this war. So this leads us in, who has been telling the Ukrainians they can win, Mike?
Well, Boris has been telling the Ukrainians they can win, and he did that a couple of times during his presentation to the Ukrainian parliament yesterday. Now, I could have chosen to show you the clip without the propaganda attached to it, but I thought that would be much more nauseating for us all to watch it with the music, the background music and the rest at number 10 pushed out this morning. So let's just have a look at this.
This is Ukraine's finest hour that will be remembered and recounted for generations to come. Your children and your grandchildren will say that Ukrainians taught the world that the brute force of an aggressor counts for nothing against the moral force of a people determined to be free. They will say that Ukrainians proved by their tenacity and sacrifice that guns and tanks cannot suppress a nation fighting for its independence. And that is why I believe and I know that Ukraine will win. I'd been to Kiev on previous visits, and I think I'd met some of you, and I'd stood in the Maidan, and I'd seen the tributes to those who had given their lives to protect Ukraine against Russian aggression. And I've wandered the lovely streets of your capital, and I've seen enough about Ukrainian freedom to know that the Kremlin was making a fundamental miscalculation, a terrible mistake. And I told everybody I knew, anybody who would listen, that Ukraine would fight and Ukraine would be right. I have one message for you today. Ukraine will win. Ukraine will be free. We will carry on supplying Ukraine alongside your other friends with weapons, funding, and humanitarian aid until we have achieved our long-term goal, which must be so to fortify Ukraine that no one will ever dare attack you again. When we look at the heroism of the Ukrainian people and the bravery of your leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, we know that Ukraine will win. And we in the UK will do everything we can to restore a free, sovereign, and independent Ukraine. Thank you all very much for listening to me today, and Slava Ukraini.
Now, I could see some of our guests squirming on the other end of the line there, and I could see it going nuts in the chat box as well. So, Vanessa, first of all, welcome to the program, but what are your thoughts on that? Because I thought that was quite an incredible propaganda piece.
Well, I mean, it's Boris's attempt at being Churchillian, isn't it? I mean, we see this sort of Churchillian thread running through all of the speeches from Zelensky to Boris now. I mean, there's so much, I'm struggling to find a polite way of saying it. There's so much rubbish in what he just said. I mean, even down to the fact that Ukraine will achieve its independence. Well, from who? From NATO, from UK, US-led occupation and control. And its proxy Nazi ultranationalist battalions. I mean, this is just, I don't know. I mean, I just feel that we're living in an alternative universe right now.
Yes, absolutely. And Alex, Vanessa's absolutely right, Churchillian, because it's the Ukrainians' finest hour. And if we just briefly put up the still from that you sent us from that of the standing ovation. Yes, what can we say? They are absolutely fooled.
Well, there's lots of wistful longing, looking up at the video screens. Perhaps a tad of the Stalin era, as in, the first that stops clapping will be spotted by the NKVD and carted off to the back. Possibly muscle men and rifle-bearing generals and soldiers of some kind in the box there. Churchillian is the royal, not just at the beginning with the rhetoric that was well recognised as Churchillian, but towards the end, that inverted word order of "so to arm Ukraine," meaning to such an extent. It's a kind of language that disappeared from English political rhetoric in the 1940s and has been very carefully brought back. One of the few moments when it breaks surface that the PR or agencies are writing the script, both for the British government and the Ukrainian government end of this. I think that the PR war is quite spectacular. In the middle of the speech there, a pretty dodgy expression used was "Ukraine will fight and Ukraine will be right." I've only ever heard that being used by both sides of Northern Irish terrorism in the past. Ulster will fight and Ulster will be right, or Ireland will fight and Ireland will be right. I've never heard it in any other context, other than we are above normal moral justification. Anything we do is self-justifying.
Yes, and Alex, just a quick comment then on the other thing that we highlighted, or we want to highlight from that, our long-term goal. So he's not talking about Ukraine's goals, he's talking about Britain's goals and his goals specifically.
This shouldn't surprise, of course, because it's, from personal experience, although it's also been attested in other sources. I know that MI6 has been running Ukrainian government, and particularly SBU, the security service, for about 15 years now. So, they well know that what they're serving is the bigger agenda. And in Brian's absolutely excellent opening 4 slides about how the Ukrainians have been led up the garden path, that came out repeatedly, that there was years, as there was with Georgia in the previous decade, years of buttering these guys up to think that if we can prove that we have a good score, we'll get into the big boys club and show our Euro-Atlantic orientation. So there's never been any bones made about it in Kiev. The aim is to join another bloc, not to be independent.
Yes. Okay, let's move back to Vanessa then. And on screen here we have a headline: former fighter in Syria launches medical mission to treat victims in Ukraine.
Yeah, where have we heard this before? What I'm going to show in this short sequence is one, as we know already, Ukraine is another proxy war for NATO. But also the tremendous crossover from Syria to Ukraine in the sense that they're moving mercenaries around that were fighting alongside Kurdish separatists in the northeast of Syria, of course, a project to partition Syria on behalf of Israel, the US, and the UK in particular, but also to anger Turkey to some degree, because of course their nemesis are the Kurds. But this guy I've picked up on in particular, his name is Mesa Gifford. He is now, he's gone from fighting alongside the YPG in Syria to Ukraine, both, as far as I can understand it, as a military expert and as someone who's going to be extending British volunteers into Ukraine, and this idea of humanitarian aid, which of course we know is a euphemism for British interference in the state affairs of a target nation. The first connection between him and what's going on now in Ukraine is on February the 24th, Zelensky launched the idea of the International Foreign Legion. On a number of news sources, Mesa Gifford has admitted that he is the one responsible for setting up the website and a number of Facebook pages to actually act as a recruitment agent, although he goes to great lengths to describe himself as a facilitator rather than a recruiter. An interesting differentiation. I'm not quite sure what the difference is. This is something that he did in Syria for people to join the YPG. He had a number of Facebook pages, including one called the Lions of Rojava, which was used as a recruitment hub for people wanting to go and fight with the YPG. This is a guy who, Mesa Gifford is a pseudonym. Sadly, there is also a financier based in Banbury who's had quite a large amount of problems because he also has the name of Mesa Gifford, and he's been regularly mixed up with this Mesa Gifford, who apparently has taken this pseudonym to protect his identity. However, as I'll point out fairly quickly, he's one of the most high-profile mercenaries that I've ever come across. I mean, here he is talking pints with Nigel Farage about Syria and Ukraine. If we come back to his recruitment drive, we have a number of websites that he may be responsible for. He does tend to go dark when it actually comes to the various websites that he claims to have established. But here you have join the International Legion of Defense of Ukraine. Freedom is a choice. Join the brave. Russia invaded Ukraine. Enlist to the International Legion of Defense of Ukraine. And there you have a button which you can press to join. You also have there the download the instructions. He gives a full list of instructions, which include contact the Embassy of Ukraine in your country, prepare your documents, which include obviously your passport, your international passport, proof of military service, and any other documents requested. Come to the embassy for the interview, fill out the application form, get instructions on arriving in Ukraine, your necessary documents. Of course, we're also hearing from mercenaries on the ground that this isn't going quite as smoothly as expected. In the Ukraine, at the collection point, join the Foreign Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine, sign a contract, which again we know from various interviews is a binding contract in the sense that you can't break it, despite the pittance that you're paid to basically be cannon fodder. Then let's have a look at who this Mesa Gifford is. So, as I said, he's a former city banker, Tory councillor, who allegedly in 2014, 2015, the dates vary depending on the media reports, he turned his back on a fat salary to join the fight against ISIS. He joined the YPG in the northeast. He then effectively, as I said, acted as a recruiting agent, or as he likes to say, a facilitator. Now, from this point on, he has regular contact with the British government, and he himself admits that he has regular contact with British security after he was detained on one return to the UK because, of course, he'd been in Syria. His own bio, which I will come on to. So this was a guy, as I said, who went in 2015. Mesa Gifford is allegedly a pseudonym, but let's have a look. This is just one section of the Google search on Mesa Gifford, which shows literally hundreds of articles about this guy, a huge archive of photographs. So for someone that is trying to protect his identity and his family, he's very high profile. Let's come back to the fact that he mentions here the humanitarian aid agency that he wants to set up, or the medical service that he wants to set up, will be based in Lviv. Why is this important? Because I'm going to make the connection here between, and you'll see why, between Gifford and the White Helmets in Syria and Gifford and the White Helmets in Ukraine. Now, the White Helmets, just to fill in an audience that may not know about them, were established by a former British military intelligence officer, James Le Mesurier, in 2013 in Turkey and Jordan, and effectively they were a pseudo-humanitarian organization, often comprising of actual Al-Qaeda and terrorist elements inside Syria, working alongside the terrorist groups to provide the demonization propaganda against the Syrian government and against Russia inside Syria, including, of course, the chemical attacks. So effectively, this guy, Mesa Gifford, wants to set up a medical aid organization in Lviv. Why is Lviv important? Because Lviv is effectively the military hub for NATO. It's the military training hub for NATO commanders and trainers that have been training, particularly the Azov and the Ida battalions in Lviv. Here you have the far-right extremists and Ukrainian military bragging about Canadian training. So in other words, just as the White Helmets could not operate inside Syria without the authority of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, sorry, the dog's dreaming while she's sleeping, these medical experts that are now gathering in Lviv under the control of Mesa Gifford cannot operate without the authority of the far-right battalions and the NATO military trainers. Then let's have another look at Mesa Gifford here. So here he repeats that he was a former foreign exchange trader who went to Syria in 2015 to fight with the YPG. And of course, as I've mentioned, the YPG is effectively another NATO member state proxy working on the partitioning of Syria once the regime change war, military war, had effectively failed. But look, this is a guy claiming to be an individual maverick who, on the basis of his own moral conscience, has decided to go and fight ISIS in Syria because he believes the British government is not doing enough. So there you have a kind of a passive message that the British government should do more and should intervene militarily in Syria. But let's have a look at what else he's also been involved in. He's conducted expeditions into the Congolese rainforest. He's campaigned against Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. And this is interesting, worked with the British Council on the Horn of Africa project, and currently studying for a master's degree in security, peacebuilding and diplomacy at Loughborough University. And I'd quite like a comment from Alex on that in the end. So let's have a quick look at British Council. Itself advertises itself as the UK's soft power advantage, so the NGO soft power, smart power complex. And the Horn of Africa project is about identifying young artists to become social leaders. So of course, this is the kind of very typical soft power intelligence scouting, the scouting out of potential opposition or controlled leadership that will be beneficial to UK foreign policy in the target country. But then let's have a look at Mesa Gifford's connection to other mercenaries now in Ukraine, like Aidan Aslan, who has been arrested by the Donetsk Popular Republic forces and is facing trial as a British mercenary who committed war crimes, or is suspected to have committed war crimes and to have been involved in the attacks on the DPR and the LPR, the Lugansk Popular Republic. An article in Middle East Eye talks about the Westerners who went from fighting Islamic State to aiding Kiev. Aidan Aslan is involved in that, but so is Mesa Gifford and a number of other names that are mentioned in that article who appear to be connected to Mesa Gifford. Aidan Aslan definitely is, because he's talked about him in a number of interviews. Now, what is Mesa Gifford setting up in Lviv, again controlled by the Azov battalions? An organization called the Nightingale Squadron. I'm sure that has no connection to Florence Nightingale. Here you have the website, which is unusual because most of his organizations, it's been very difficult to find any trace of them. It's been very difficult to find any websites for them. So what are they doing? Building teams to help Ukraine. First of all, military, medical, and humanitarian. And by the way, this is allegedly someone who had no military training before he went to the Northeast, but yet there are numerous videos and photographs of him fighting alongside the YPG in the northeast. This is also a guy who has direct contact with the FBI. This is admitted by himself, with British intelligence, with British government, British Parliament. He's been able to write articles in the Telegraph, the Times, the Guardian, the Jerusalem Post. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If we come down to the second last paragraph, so he basically fills you in, this is his fundraiser, and of course the headline on the fundraiser, which I haven't shown here, is Ukraine needs you. So that's a throwback to wartime propaganda to get people to join up. But what he says, we want to be absolutely clear here, the ambition is to create a Ukrainian version of the White Helmets. The people of Ukraine are fighting like lions in defense of their country, and we must do our part to support them. In the same article that talks about his mission, he says again, the ambition is to create a Ukrainian version of the White Helmets. So this is clearly his remit here. Now, we can say that this guy is an individual working on his own. That's certainly how he likes to portray himself. I would speculate that with the contacts that he has, with the free rein that he has, the fact that he was the one to establish the website immediately to recruit people for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, his connections to intelligence-linked media in the UK, his connection directly to Parliament, his promotion of UK foreign policy, both in Syria and in Ukraine, would lead me to believe that he's rather more than just an interested individual fighting on behalf of a cause that he genuinely and perhaps misguidedly believes in. His arguments, as I say, are all based around British foreign policy, global Britain's foreign policy. But then let's look at also how it ties in with the White Helmets policy. Raed Saleh, who's the director of the White Helmets in Syria, has been very clear that the White Helmets in Syria stand with the people of Ukraine, and they have offered not only to provide training, they've provided video training, but they've offered to send their own operatives into Ukraine to help establish something similar there. Then let's look at the resurgence of the White Helmets in political and diplomatic circles. Raed Saleh has recently been speaking at Chatham House. He's been speaking with Samantha Powers at SOAS in London. He's been meeting with US and Canadian officials. Now, why is Canada important? Because, of course, Canada is directly involved, as is the US, UK, France, Germany, etc., in the training of the Azov and Aidar Nazi battalions. And of course, in the last 2 days, General Trevor Kadja, formerly the head of the Canadian forces, was reportedly arrested trying to escape from the Azovstal plant in Mariupol, and is being held for questioning by Russian forces. Then let's make the jump to Alistair Harris. Alistair Harris, CEO of ARC Group Analysis, Research and Knowledge, who employed James Le Mesurier, the former British military intelligence officer who established the White Helmets in Syria. I think around 2016, I started to talk about the fact that the White Helmets would become a global franchise. So we now have potentially the White Helmets being established in Ukraine. We have here Alistair Harris talking about the fact that he has been involved in the British intelligence operations in Lebanon to infiltrate governmental, military and security institutions, as proven by the leaked Foreign Office documents, I think last year. But here he is on his own LinkedIn page talking about the establishment of defense inside Lebanon itself. So a copy of the White Helmets, the logo is very similar to the White Helmet logo inside Syria. He's also involved in establishing or in promoting Medics for Ukraine, another kind of mirror organization to what Mesa Gifford is doing to supply allegedly humanitarian and medical aid into Ukraine. Of course, again, as we know, that has regularly been used as a cover for supplying arms and military equipment. And here on his same LinkedIn page in his activity section, he's also talking about a new initiative in Yemen in relation to the Palestinian white helmets. So I think what we have here is a confirmation or vindication of my opinion in 2016 that the reason that the white helmet construct was being so heavily protected by its UK and US and EU handlers was because it was going to be used as a future construct, as a Trojan horse to infiltrate the society and enable military action against the enemies of the same NATO member states that established the white helmets in Syria.
Well, maybe we could get some thoughts from Alex on that, because that was quite an amazing analysis of, yeah.
As well, I'm blown away by it. It's extremely coherent, and I was asked specifically to comment there on Mr. Pseudonym's description of himself in his blurb as doing security studies at Loughborough University. Well, the big nest of deep state students of security and intelligence in Britain is St Andrews. There was an interesting erroneous mention of London at the very end of the slide in question. In a moment, perhaps Vanessa can tell us where she got that blurb from a presentation of some kind, because when I read it, Loughborough University, London, my first thought was an American put this together and assumed it was a London university. Even if it were a foreigner based in Britain, such as for a PR company, maybe some European or someone from further afield working in London, they would have gone away and looked it up, even if they couldn't pronounce Loughborough. So Loughborough University, London, suggests to me that that blurb has got some foreign angle to it, as in not British, which is rare, unusual, because as Vanessa has eloquently set out, all roads lead to London, or the Cotswolds in this setup. The interesting use of a pseudonym that's rare and belongs to a real-world man who's been victimized by it, a trader in Banbury, or financier, sorry, is a hallmark of authenticity to me, because I know from all my Cambridge cohort who went into the City of London that the two wings, namely the traders and the geeks, love to play elaborate practical jokes and quite acerbic ones on each other. And it seems to me just the kind of thing that one of the forex trading types in the city would be to find as his dupe, as an unwilling victim, somebody of a real name that was easily identifiable because it's rare, who belongs to the other wing of the city, and say, there you are, So I'm afraid it's horribly redolent of all I know about the Hooray Henry set from public school and Oxbridge and how they go off and do their jollies in the world. So we're just back to Vanessa for a moment to tell us where she got that blurb from that interestingly describes Loughborough as being in London. Oh, before I forget to say, Loughborough has no background known to me in security studies, which makes it even more suspect. I think, as far as I'm aware, Loughborough University in Leicestershire in the Midlands is well known for sports, nutrition and related fields, but not for security.
I'm just checking actually, because I have a memory of seeing that he was educated in Cambridge. The problem is that the information changes. I mean, as I said, I've never come across someone that is so prolifically seen in Western media. It's extraordinary. I mean, you can't move when you put his name into a Google search. You'll be endlessly watching his interviews and his reading his reports. The fact that he's been given a platform in the Guardian, the Times, and the Telegraph, and the Jerusalem Post is also very telling to me. I mean, you don't get that kind of
coverage,
exposure, unless, of course, you are useful to the British intelligence services, let's say. So I think you're absolutely right. That blurb, oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot now. I can't actually remember which website that came from, because, as I say, there are simply so many. But I will definitely find it. But I think you're absolutely on point regarding the Cambridge connection, because I have a funny feeling I was just trying to look then at his Wikipedia page, but it doesn't mention it. But I'm pretty certain it mentions it somewhere else, that he was
There's a lot
educated.
of there's a lot of getting one's own back on various professions going on here. I mean, at public school in Oxbridge, the big question is, do you go into the city or in the spook world, if you've got the brain for either, right? And within the city, do you prostitute your brain high or low? Do you become a geek or a trader? But if our man here became more of the trading route, the sort of the front end, the barrow boy type, as they call them in the city, and his backroom boys are, using him. The ultimate joke is that those in Cambridge who went into the spook world are ultimately pulling the strings, and they will drop him when he ceases to be useful, and then he won't get his acres of coverage anymore.
Well, Alex, let's move on then. And Vanessa was talking about what's mercenaries operating in Syria, then moving to Ukraine. We have one that you want to highlight here, Andrew Hill.
He's extremely local. I have very little background on who he is, but he is from your own city of Plymouth. He says so in the recording we're about to hear. This is his piece to camera when he's been captured by the Russians, and it's courtesy of Rudenko television, 2.5 minutes long, a bit disheveled, and he seems, whether it's genuine or not, to be genuinely penitent and to have got himself into more than he could, to bitten off more than he could chew, shall we say. So although there's not much more background, I expect there'll be follow-up, given that his family are near you in Plymouth. We'll find out one way or another what's going on, and I think the video speaks for itself.
My name is Andrew Hill. I'm 35 years old. I was born on the 25th of September 1986. I'm a British citizen and I live in Plymouth. After coming to Ukraine, I realised it was hell here. After meeting a lot of foreign mercenaries who have experience of fighting in a lot of different countries around the world, they are ready, they are willing to do any dirty job needed for money. They are really bad people and they are sadists. War is not, they don't come to war for money. They do get money, but they do it because they enjoy it. Many of them do not understand the Ukrainian and the Russian language. This is the reason why they shot them, killed them, and injured them indiscriminately. They stole valuable things from these people without any shame at all. Mercenaries also tortured Russian soldiers and Russian pro-activists. They cut off their fingers and they tortured them. Prisoners were severely beaten and they were deprived of their food and their drink. I have never seen such cruelty on this scale before. The supporters of the neo-Nazi and the nationalist ideology prevail in this camp. They are proud of their tattoos of the swastikas and their double SS emblems. It was awful. Unfortunately, I found myself among these terrible people and unwittingly became involved in these war crimes. I understand everything that has been done wrong, and I hope for leniency from the Donetsk People's Republic, and I hope that hopefully that I am forgiven and that I am able to go home. I say to all foreign nationals that are in this country that they need to leave this country immediately. This is not their war. They can leave at any point. They can break their contracts at any point. I recommend they do this. You are not covered under international law and you will not be covered under the Geneva Convention. This is not a trip for people to come to. This is a real war, a war with two countries. And if you come here, there's a real chance that you will die. This is not your war. I urge you to leave immediately.
Well, pretty poignant, Mike. I think we have to say we've no idea of the circumstances in which he gave that address to camera. He does appear to be reading a script. Was he under duress? Has he suffered sleep deprivation? We just don't know. But there is a certain truth to the message that we're actually picking up from looking at other sources across the internet.
Alex, CTV here, military officer retires, heads to Ukraine. I think this is the officer that Vanessa was speaking about a second ago?
It is, and the staff writer for this is Lee Bertium of the Canadian Press. So this is mainstream, actually. I stress again, because otherwise we'll be accused of misinforming people. This is unconfirmed as of yesterday, as Vanessa was at pains to say herself. But this isn't just any old general. Let's see what's going on here. So the byline is Ottawa. It's written as of yesterday or the day before. A senior leader, that's Newspeak for flag officer, in the Canadian Armed Forces, bear in mind all that Vanessa has rightly said about the Canadian leading role and the Ukrainian emigres steering Canadian policy towards Ukraine, that's in the back of that picture here, has retired and travelled, two verbs in one time, retired and travelled to Ukraine to help defend the country from Russia's invasion while still under investigation for alleged sexual misconduct. The Department of National Defence, the Canadian War Office, confirmed on Thursday, so this is a few days ago now, nearly a week, that Lieutenant, or I think they say Lieutenant Governor in Canadian English, Trevor Cadieux, I think French-Canadian name, whether he's Quebecois or not, I don't know, retired, so handed in his notice to the Canadian MOD on the 5th of April after more than 30 years in uniform, even as military police continue their investigation into his conduct. It gets worse. Cadieux's sudden, and I'll read the next bit as one word because it is, retirement and departure come more than 6 months after the popular officer was slated to take command of the Canadian Army, with some military insiders predicting his eventual appointment as Chief of the Defence Staff. So that's, for those who don't follow the militaries closely, overall head of all three armed services. Now, the Defence Chief, General Wayne Eyre, instead quietly suspended Cadieux because the MOD only made a statement in Ottawa after this all came out about the alleged capture of Cadieux in Azovstal. Eyre quietly suspended Cadieux as Army Commander in September. So sorry, I'm mixing up two periods here, but it's true that the Canadian MOD only responded after the alleged capture. After Cadieux was informed of what the Canadians have been describing as historical allegations of sexual misconduct. Here it gets worse, and I think Brian will probably want to comment. Following news of Cadieux's departure, Eyre announced, this is a bit like an in petto appointment by the Pope to a cardinal, announced that he had tapped Lieutenant General Paul to become the next commander of the Canadian Army. But there's more. The Army in Canada has been without a permanent commander since February 2021. That's over a year, when Eyre himself, the man we were just hearing announcing the promotion, was tapped to serve as acting CDS, while the then Defence Chief, Admiral Ark MacDonald, was being investigated for alleged sexual behaviour. Although MacDonald was not charged, Prime Minister Trudeau opted to replace him permanently with Eyre. Another French-Canadian, Michel-Henri Saint-Louis, has served as acting army head since April 2021. Eyre also announced the pending retirement of the Navy commander, Vice Admiral Craig Baines, who came under fire last July for golfing with the retired defence chief while the latter was under police investigation. A bit of a nest going on here. Baines, who apologised and was kept on as head of the Canadian Navy, promised to make the most of his second chance, and he will be replaced by Rear Admiral Angus Topshee. Canadian Press writes, Cadieux is one of several senior commanders, to be investigated by the military police for alleged sexual misconduct in just 1 year. Those allegations, well, the usual signing off about is there enough oversight of the military. So there is a heck of a lot actually going on around this man. And all of a sudden he does a bunk, and no sooner has he done a bunk, there's his mugshot, Cadieux, then we find this going on. This is unconfirmed, I say for the fourth time, lest I be accused of misinformation. The Hal Turner radio show and some other French and English sources in North America are reporting as of yesterday, the 2nd of May, that he was allegedly captured in Mariupol in the Azovstal complex. The byline here is that, or the text itself is that unconfirmed reports from various sources in Ukraine and Russia claim that Canadian Forces Lieutenant General Trevor Cadieux, of course he was just out of the forces on paper when he was captured, has been captured by Russian forces in Mariupol. He was allegedly trying to shimmy or crawl through, use your imagination, a sewer pipe to get out of the Azovstal facility. And the update as of 9:43 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time yesterday is that additional unconfirmed claims have now surfaced. So this is almost exactly 24 hours before the time we're speaking, which allege that Cadieux has been taken to Moscow to stand trial. He was also, and the source here, Hal Turner, is careful to capitalize this so you don't miss it, he was allegedly in charge in that underground facility of Biolab number 1, where 18 people worked with deadly viruses. Well, we'll let that stand or fall as time proceeds. But Brian, The Canadian Armed Forces, what kind of a state are they in if we look at that summary from a mainstream source?
Well, if you've got to the state where you don't have a senior officer in charge of a major arm of the military for a period of a year, you're obviously in full breakdown. But one of the things that I've always said is that, of course, where you see the fraud and the corruption, you need an engine to drive it, and that's got to be the blackmail. It may be normal sexual um, activities going on, or it could be the ultimate, which is always children. But we're in breakdown. The same breakdown exists certainly in the US Armed Forces at the moment, because many senior retired American servicemen are talking about it. And of course, we know that here in UK, we've also got breakdown occurring within the British Armed Forces. So is this an accident across those three countries? No, I don't think so. This is orchestrated in order to transform those military structures into something rather different than a sovereign nation with its own sovereign armed forces.
Now, I'm going to hand over to Mike in a moment for something on Lavrov getting into hot water. But just to accompany that, I'll show a silent play out for a few seconds of just after the 2014 Maidan coup, which is when Zelensky, still then only a comedian, was saying in his native Russian language, because he's from Kryvyi Rog in the southeast of the country, just after the Ukrainian new government started persecuting the Russian language in public. He's making lots of gestures and saying, I know millions of good people in Russia proper. My community is Russian speaking in Ukraine. I don't have any loyalty to foreign countries. I just want to get along in peace, leave our language alone, let us speak it. Because, of course, this was the time when it was being outlawed from schools, kindergartens in some ways. Well, they were just about allowed in kindergarten, but main primary, not anymore, cinemas, etc. And of course, it wasn't just Russian, it was Hungarian, Romanian, Polish, Lithuanian, other minority languages in various parts of the country were equally being outlawed from the public space. So, and he's wearing a Muhammad Ali t-shirt there. So he's undergone quite a transformation in more ways than one, as old Vlad.
Indeed. And well, over the last couple of days, Alex, as you say, there's been quite a furore in the Western press over comments made by Sergei Lavrov. Here's the Sky News headline. Adolf Hitler had Jewish origins, claims Russian minister Sergei Lavrov in rant. Outrage in Israel as Russia's Lavrov complains Hitler had Jewish roots, according to France 24. The BBC had Israel outrage at Sergei Lavrov's claim that Hitler was part Jewish. And the Atlantic Council getting in on it as well. Lavrov's anti-Semitic outburst exposes absurdity of Russia's Nazi Ukraine claims. So let's just have a look and see what Lavrov had to say. Well, first of all, he was asked a question, and the question was, this is how you see it. While Vladimir Zelensky puts it differently, he believes denazification doesn't make any sense. He is a Jew. The Nazis, as of, there are very few of them, brackets several thousand. Vladimir Zelensky refutes your view of the situation. Do you believe Vladimir Zelensky is an obstacle to peace? And Sergei Lavrov said this: it makes no difference to me what President Vladimir Zelensky refutes or does not refute. He is as fickle as the wind. As they say, he can change his position several times a day. He said there is Nazification there. The captured militants, as well as members of the Azov and Aidar battalions and other units, wear swastikas or symbols of Nazi Waffen-SS battalions on their clothes or have them tattooed on their bodies. They openly read and promote Mein Kampf. He said Zelensky's argument is, how can there be Nazism in Ukraine if he's a Jew? I may be mistaken, said Lavrov, but Adolf Hitler had Jewish blood too. This means nothing. And he went on to say, the wise Jewish people say that the most ardent anti-Semites are usually Jews. Every family has its black sheep, as we say. So that's what Sergei Lavrov said. But and what he said, of course, was that Hitler had Jewish blood. Now, if you do a cursory search for those three words, Hitler and Jewish blood, you get a whole swathe of discussion that's been going on for a very long time about the situation with Hitler and his paternal grandfather. And so I've chosen deliberately the Jerusalem Post coverage of this because this is from 2019, and the headline is, Study Suggests Adolf Hitler's Paternal Grandfather Was Jewish. Now, the point here is that there's been outrage expressed in the media outrage by Israel on what Lavrov said, but there was no outrage at the time with respect to this particular study or the person who promoted the study. The study was promoted in the Jewish press around the world and in the British media as well. So if we just put that back on screen, let's have a look at what this says. Was Adolf Hitler's paternal grandfather Jewish? The controversial theory has been debated for decades by historians, with many agreeing that he was not part of the tribe, in quotes, as there was no evidence to substantiate this claim. However, a study of by psychologist and physician Leonard Sachs has shed new light supporting the claim that Hitler's father's father had Jewish roots. The study, titled Revisiting the Question of Adolf Hitler's Paternal Grandfather, which was published in the current issue of the Journal of European Studies, examines claims by Hitler's lawyer, Hans Frank, who allegedly discovered the truth. And again, there was no criticism of the Journal for European Studies at the time either. Hitler asked Frank to look into the claim in 1930 after his nephew, William Patrick Hitler, threatened to expose the leader's grandfather was Jewish. In his 1946 memoir, which was published 7 years after he was executed during the Nuremberg trials, quotes, Frank claimed to have uncovered evidence in 1930 that Hitler's paternal grandfather was a Jewish man living in Graz, Austria, in the household where Hitler's grandmother was employed. And it was in 1836 that Hitler's grandmother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, became pregnant. Sachs explained. He went on to say, Frank wrote in his memoir that he conducted an investigation as Hitler had requested, and he discovered that the existence of correspondence between Maria Anna Schicklgruber, Hitler's grandmother, and a Jew named Frankenberger living in Graz. According to Frank, the letters hinted that Frankenberger's 19-year-old son had impregnated Maria Anna while she worked in the Frankenberger household, that the illegitimate child of the Schicklgruber had been conceived under conditions which required Frankenberger to pay alimony. The article goes on to say, Sachs writes in the study that according to the letters in Frank's memoir, Frankenberger Sr. sent money for the support of the child from infancy until his 14th birthday. However, Sachs noted that the accuracy of Frank's claims in his memoirs have been questioned. So, Vanessa and Alex, I'll start with Vanessa. My question is, where does this outrage come from? Is it because it was, a foreign minister of Russia? Was it because it was Russia specifically, or was it because it was a politician, a foreign minister of a country's government, that the outrage was applied to him in those circumstances, when this discussion has been going on for decades, actually, and we haven't had the same outrage foisted upon anybody else? Now, you're muted. Right. Well.
Okay.
Yeah. There we go.
I mean, for me, I found the timing of this very interesting, and we have to remember that much of the justification, or rather the cover-up of the connection between the government in Kiev and the Azov battalions, although Zelensky himself has no problem admitting that the Azov battalions are absorbed into the Ukrainian military. But I think this is, and I'd be interested to see what Alex thinks, but for me, this is a shot across the bows of the propaganda by Lavrov, because I think where he's heading with this is the fact that the Nazi movement, let's say, and to a large degree the Zionist movement, have worked hand in glove. I mean, for example, we know that Odessa was known as the Gates of Zion. Zeev Jabotinsky, sorry, I'm reading this, who established groups like B'nai Avia, Hashomer Hatzair group, who were involved in the Palestinian ethnic cleansing in 1948, the Nakba. He also established the Irgun terrorist group. He worked hand in hand with Simon Petlura, who was president of the Ukraine People's Republic 1918 to 21, who, according to Zionist information, was responsible for the deaths of 50,000 Jews during the pogroms of the 1920s. But Jabotinsky saw a parallel between Zionism and Ukrainian ultra-nationalism. So he persuaded Petlura to recognize the Jews as a nation, to allow them to have their own paramilitary and security forces. And this is where it's important. So this was in the 1920s, before the Zionist movement in after the Zionist movement. But there were various other Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Zionist similar cults that were existing in Ukraine prior to the Zionist movement in the 1880s. But effectively, these Jewish paramilitary and police groups would be independent, except in the case of a war with then the Soviet Union. So I think historically, Lavrov, knowing how the Russians work and to some degree, and knowing how Lavrov's kind of diplomacy works, I think he's prodding the bear here. He's saying to them, we know what's going on here. We know what has been going on for centuries, actually. And he's letting them know that. And I think that's where the outrage is coming from, because they know exactly what he's getting at here. And we also have to remember the Russians are collating evidence of this. The Russians are very quiet. They're not like the West in the fanfaring of what little evidence they have and the blowing up with hyperbole. The Russians keep quiet until they have everything collated, or at least that's my experience, for example, in Syria and even now in Ukraine. So I think the outrage is fear.
Alex?
Yes, just to add, I very much agree with that. To add to that, I would say that the Israelis would have been less annoyed, the ruling Israelis, I should say, not the people of Israel, if it had been some dyed-in-the-wool pro-Arabist such as Yevgeny Primakov saying it, but it isn't. It's Lavrov, who's been very careful to hold the balance in his Middle Eastern diplomacy. If you want the blunt answer to why the outrage now, it's simply that Lavrov and we're not claiming equivalence, but in her own circles, Vanessa are Gentiles. I'm sorry to be blunt, but if you're a Gentile, you're not allowed to say you know the difference between different kinds of Zionists to this extent. The Jerusalem Post, Haaretz, the rest of the Israeli press will host excellent ding-dongs, better even than the American Jewish press, between right, left, pro and anti-Zionist factions of Jewry. But they're for Jews only to participate in, is the dominant narrative. Okay, so we're not supposed to touch this. That's why the outrage is there. If you want a 1-hour primer of everything Vanessa has said, superbly well done, find her on her Substack or on her YouTube channel, discussion with Matthew Ehret yesterday about this, how Jabotinsky, Helphand and others of a second wave of more secular Zionism supplanted, in the interests of Britain and America and their financial centers, the first wave of religious Zionism. And that struggle's still going on in Israel. David Scott will be the first to report on it, on how religious Zionists get treated like dirt by the secular Zionists who run the show. And we're not allowed to talk about it. And Lavrov is talking about it, hence the outrage.
Yes, okay, well, we'll just very quickly put this on screen. This is from Politico, because the outrage, not just with respect to comments by Lavrov, but also comments by the Pope. Because the Pope has decided that it's time to speak out on this, and he's saying that NATO may have caused the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So especially in Poland, which of course still very close ties to the Roman Catholic Church, having had a recent Pope themselves, are very upset by this, but right across the Western media as well, some criticism of the fact that he has made this statement. But Alex, how can Ukraine build back better?
I'm not even going to bother going through the gist of this article, but Foreign Affairs magazine is, as I repeat from what I said previously, don't confuse it with Foreign Policy, which is the in-house journal of the CFR, but it is influential in the Beltway. It's now arguing that Ukraine can build back better, interesting phrase, by using assets seized by the West from Russia. Of course, that's characterized here as the Kremlin's assets, so that we think of the to pay for reconstruction. But the main thing is this, who are the authors? I say no more than pointing out to who the authors are. Philip Zelikow, former executive director of the 9/11 Commission, and Simon Johnson of the MIT Sloan School of Management, former chief economist at the IMF. Any comment, Mike?
Well, I don't think there needs to be any comment on that.
It goes hand in glove with all the other so-called monetary aid being pushed into Ukraine, which is just going to control them through debt.
Yes.
And if you've made it through nearly an hour of Ukraine coverage, but well worth it today, given what we had to say, this is my not final, but and finally for the Ukraine segment. Suzanne Seddon tweets out, "I have to laugh when I see stuff like this now. It's just beyond insane now. What is it that's beyond insane? It is this. The blessed Volodymyr of Kryvyi Rog now has candles to be burned for prayers of peace in Ukraine." And if we zoom in, it's a bit blurry because I've made it full screen, but on the blurb that goes with the candles of an almost bare-chested blessed Volodymyr, it says, "Light a candle for Ukraine. All the proceeds will be donated to the non-profit organization," and indeed it's a US charity, a proper 501c3 charity, Global Response Management. That turned out to be run by veterans, military veterans. I wonder what kind of veterans.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Well, we just want to emphasize that we are looking at a lot of material that is good material, which is on the internet, which is about Ukraine. Several people have said, how do we search ourselves to see what's going on? So here on screen are a selection of people. We're not saying that any particular one is right. What we are saying is that if you do scan across some of these channels, you will learn a great deal. Professor John Mearsheimer, who's top left, very outspoken against the West policy. He says NATO's created the war. I wouldn't agree with him on some of the other more military things that he says. Livre Noir is part of the French journalistic group that are reporting from well inside the war zone. They are very good. We've obviously got tweets coming out from a variety of people, but Earl Grey, I've mentioned before, a young man doing some very good analysis of what's happening. Bottom left, we've got just one of the many reports that are now indicating it's very clear that the Ukrainian armed forces are starting to retreat in many areas. They have fought immensely bravely, but the facts are that the Russians are effectively now a steamroller starting to move through. But that steamroller does not move fast. We've got local reports as in centre, and far right, we've got one of the many tweet reports about the Canadian general that we've commented on. Here's some more. Obviously, the Duran well established, the Dreisen report extremely good. The new Atlas had some interesting information. But the ones at the bottom of this screen are where it gets very interesting because there's now a number of sites doing very detailed analysis of the war on the ground, showing very detailed maps. So you might like to go and have a look at those. Freeze this on screen to see it. Defense Politics Asia, I have found to be particularly helpful. So there we are. That's somewhere for you to have a look at. And if I can move on through, we also get clues from the BBC because it's obvious now the BBC doesn't really want to report on Ukraine. And the reason is that if they were to do so, they would start to reveal that Ukraine is now suffering on the battlefield and suffering huge casualties, which of course Boris Johnson is going to inflate further by telling the Ukrainians mistakenly that they can win. And this one was a repeat from something I think we put up on Monday.
Yes.
So this was just reinforcing the fact that at every way we turn, they're trying to get more weapons into Ukraine.
Okay, now let's just very briefly talk about the propaganda operation in the UK. And well, somebody, thank you very much for this, hinted that I might want to go and have a look at a job that the Civil Service is advertising at the moment. Except when I went to have a look at it, I'm not able to view the job because it's already been withdrawn or has been closed. But luckily, it is still possible to find it if we want. This is a job within the Homeland Security Group, RICU, and it's for a senior campaign manager. The job application closed on the 27th of April. The Research, Information and Communications Unit, RICU, is an insight and research-led communications unit embedded within the Prevent Directorate in the Homeland Security Group. We are responsible for developing and implementing evidence-based campaigns and behavior change activity in support of national security priorities. So let's just have a look at the hierarchy of this. It is within the Home Office, but then you've got the Homeland Security Group, and then the Prevent Directorate, and then the Research, Information and Communications Unit. And so here is Chloe Squires, who is the Director General of the Homeland Security Group. Now, this group, RICU, is modelled largely on this organisation, the original fake news unit, the BBC, and the Information Research Department. Now, this is from Morning Star. I absolutely recommend this article. Go and have a read at it. This is Ian Sinclair, and the subhead says that he's revealing the hidden history of the BBC's relationship with the secret state, suppression of subversives, and support of the military for military intervention overseas. Now, the Information Research Unit, the IRD, was eventually shut down in 1977 by David Owen, but it's the inspiration for this RICU organisation. It was the government department which George Orwell gave his list of suspected communists to, including people like Charlie Chaplin and Michael Redgrave at the time. And also IRD agents took part in many historic events, including the entry into the European Economic Community, the Korean War, the Suez Crisis, the Malayan Emergency, the Northern Ireland Troubles, the Mau Mau Uprising, the Cyprus Emergency. So they were conducting smear attacks on British trade unionists. They were attacking opponents of the British military. They were planting fake news stories in the British press and also the press abroad. And of course, this is very much another organisation or section within the British government, modelled also on the Information Research Department, which was Andy Price's Counter Disinformation and Media Development Group within the Foreign Office. So although the IRD was shut down in 1977, the model was continued to be used, and Britain continuing to push out propaganda. So why are we mentioning this today? Well, a contract has been awarded as part of the Media Monitoring and Associated Services framework, as it's called, which is a sort of a tranche of money which is given out to multiple contracts. And it's been given to this organisation here, Press Data Limited. And I believe it's about £1.1 million or a little less than that. Here's Press Data's website. Delivering value through insight is how they describe themselves. It's a 2-year deal. It was signed in January. As I say, just under £1.1 million awarded to them for monitoring and analysing media coverage of public communications activity across multiple channels, including broadcast, online, and social media. So the diagram that I have of the government's propaganda network is now completely out of date because we haven't included this particular program and these particular organisations. But for the UK government, Alex, to be saying, just very briefly, please, to be saying, that Russia is bombarding the West with its disinformation when we can evidence the fact that the British government has established so much institutional infrastructure in order to pursue exactly the same aims. Again, we have to use the hypocrisy word here.
Yes, and if you want to know the other side of George Orwell's career, which he repented of by writing his book 1984, it is that he was originally one of the torturing policemen himself before he hated himself for doing it. And a very recent book, I forget the authoress's name, on that is Finding George Orwell in Burma. I also noticed that the strap line for the category of contract award that you showed on screen when you showed who had been awarded it is entitled Media Monitoring and Associated Services, or very similar wording. Well, if media monitoring also includes the playing the poacher as well as the gamekeeper through shaping people's minds in social media, behavioural stuff, doesn't that give us more of a clue as to what BBC monitoring has been doing all these years, as rather Brian has been suggesting in his analysis?
Yes, 100%.
Well, I would certainly say so. More on that in due course.
Okay, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there, or you could pick something up at the UK Column shop. But please do share any material that you find on the various platforms.
Okay, well, I'm just bringing this one up on screen very briefly. Louise Collins was very kind to send us a communication or exchange a communication with a local MP. And that was the Conservative MP, Mr. Magnell. She basically said to him that how was it that our veterans, elderly and those in poverty had never been offered a £350 monthly payment to see them through the winter or buy clothes and food, but we seem to be offering people who are coming in as refugees now the £350 payment. And she's essentially saying pretty strongly, shouldn't we be spending this money on people who are living in Britain, and chastising him for the fact that he is supporting this new agenda. Well, the response she got back was pretty typical now for MPs. So he said, thank you for sharing your views on the war in Ukraine. While I appreciate your strength of feeling on the issue and take on board your concerns, I'm afraid I disagree. I do not believe we can equate the current cost of living with the need to compensate those taking in Ukrainian refugees to offer them sanctuary from the ravaging of their country by war. I also believe it is of the utmost importance for the security of the whole of Europe to stand up to Russia's egregious actions. If we shy away from standing up for sovereignty in Ukraine and for this totally unjustified aggression, it will only embolden Putin to the point where our own national security is threatened. We must make a stand here. And now that these actions will not be tolerated. Thank you again for contacting me. So pretty typical there that the local MP has simply brushed the concerns away, more concerned with how we're going to help out Ukraine than how we're going to help people who are living in the country. And I find this a despicable and duplicitous way of dealing with people in this country by our local MPs. But let's move on to the subject of the NHS and the MHRA and indeed the nation's health. I'm going to welcome Debi Evans and say, Debi, thank you for staying with us. We've had a very long segment on Ukraine this morning. And of course, your take on things is that while things go on in Ukraine, that is the overwhelming smokescreen by which some very dangerous things are being done in other areas around the NHS and the health of the nation. So welcome, and what are your initial comments?
Oh, good afternoon, and do apologise if you can hear a slight hiss. My laptop computer's decided to fire up, so if you can hear that, I apologise. Yeah, as you know, I'm kind of a little bit of a play on words. I'm focusing mainly on UK rain, as in June rain, because I do see an awful lot going on within the NHS, and a lot stopping within the NHS, and the MHRA have got huge powers that maybe are not being looked at as much as we should be looking at. So I'm concentrating my focus on that.
Okay, and of course you've been staying with the MHRA. Now I've just got a couple of slides here which you were keen to put up, but of course the MHRA at the moment trying to puff up its image, and in particular to say to people, trust us, we're transparent, we don't have conflicts of interest, but rather the proof seems to be very different, that when we ask MHRA questions, they don't want to necessarily reply. So this first one here, if we can pop it on screen, is the MHRA putting out an advert saying we're seeking your views to help strengthen our conflicts of interest policy. Our reply to that is they're pretty opaque. But you've also been noticing that after the UK column has got public interest into the MHRA's online, that's YouTube board meetings, they suddenly seem to be backtracking a bit. What are they doing here? Are they now having all the meetings in private, or are they mixing and matching depending on the topics?
Well, that's a really great question. And as yet, you know, the last board meeting on YouTube was February. The March one was held in private. That was suddenly cancelled. The April one isn't yet up. And then I was looking for tickets for the May board meeting. But clearly you can see that there isn't about to be a May board meeting according to that document. There's a June, and then it seems to be 3 monthly. So I have emailed Dame June Rain again and asked her if the board meetings will be carrying on, but some of them will be held in private and some of them will be held in public, or whether they're just going to 3 monthly board meetings. And it's interesting, because still today I haven't received any of the answers to my questions that I put at the MHRA board meeting. It's not on YouTube, and the written minutes for the February meeting haven't been put up either. And I don't seem to be getting a lot of replies from the MHRA at the moment. I seem to be stonewalled. I can't imagine why.
I think I can imagine why, Debbie, and that's because you're asking very good questions that they either can't or don't want to answer. But of course, the other person that you had a very interesting exchange with recently was none other than Jeremy Hunt himself. We've just got an image here, which was a screenshot of the Zoom meeting that you were invited to participate in. And in that meeting, you were able to ask Jeremy Hunt a pretty clear question. Now, we'll just play a very short video clip so that we know exactly what you asked him. And we've then got an email that he sent back to you where he didn't appear to have the answer. Let's look at the question first.
Because we're drawing to a close, Iqbal, did you want to take another couple of questions and I can happily talk about all of them together? Would that be helpful?
Okay, that would be, because we've got two colleagues who've got their hands up, and I think it'll be only fair. But could I ask you both, Debbie and Ondi, please try and be very short in your questions. It's first to Debbie.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask a question. Jeremy, I just wanted to ask, because the MHRA obviously are in charge of patient safety when it comes to pharmacovigilance, and the PEAG group at the Commission for Human Medicines. But according to the MHRA data, as I'm seeing today, as of today, there are over 1.5 million serious adverse reactions and 2,000 deaths. Now, I know we cannot attribute these to the vaccine, and I appreciate that. However, without forensic investigations and without further investigation, we're never going to know. And as a nurse, I'm meeting people who are saying that they're reporting yellow cards to the MHRA, but they're not receiving any help or support back, either from their GPs or from the MHRA. So I just wondered what your thoughts were with regarding to an investigation on the serious adverse reactions that we're currently seeing. Thank you.
Debbie's question, I want to take that away because I think it's something that my committee might be interested in looking at. And I'll need to talk to my other members of my committee because we decide these things democratically. But when I was Health Secretary, I commissioned the University of Sheffield, Leeds and Manchester to do a report onto medication error. And, we found there were 8,000 deaths a year. And, obviously we are very concerned about the adverse reactions that we have from the COVID vaccines. It's not for me to make a judgment as to the balance of risk, but I think we do need to fully understand the issues that you raise.
So that was pretty clear. Debbie, you raised the issue of 2,000 people dying and approaching 1.5 million vaccine adverse reactions. He says he needs to go away. Things are done democratically, but he'll get an answer for you. I'll bring up his reply, which he sent to you, and then we'll get you to respond. So this is the email Debbie received back from Jeremy Hunt. Dear Miss Evans, thank you for your email. And my apologies, you'd not received a reply to your email of the 4th of April. That's when she was chasing up the response to a question which our audience has just seen in the Zoom meeting. As chair of the committee, I receive a very large amount of correspondence, and it takes time to respond to each one with the attention it deserves. Thank you for taking the time to attend the patient safety webinar, and I appreciate the concerns you raised on adverse reactions from the COVID-19 vaccination. The Health and Social Care Committee members decided collectively the areas they will look into. It's only fair to point out that I receive a lot of emails asking the committee to look into a number of aspects of health which are as equally as important as each other. I will consider your request for an investigation into this matter the next time the committee meets to discuss its future programme. Debbie, my take on this is you've got a classic fob off. He's taken your question back to the committee and they didn't like it. And he's unfortunately been left with the dirty work of pushing you away. Or am I being unkind?
No, I think sadly, Brian, I think you're right. But clearly he said on camera, and he said in that email that these COVID-19 vaccine serious adverse reactions are of a serious concern, and yet they're not serious enough to put on the agenda for the Health and Social Care Committee or on his own Patient Watch committee that he founded. So, you can walk the walk, but you can talk the talk, but he's not walking the walk. And as I think we'll come to see in a few minutes, I have to look at Jeremy Hunt's motives as to what his intentions are with regards to serious adverse reactions, because for me, they are a priority. And I believe that he's getting many emails. I know that he's getting many emails, many from our audience who are emailing him with these same regards. So, the concerns are there. These numbers are escalating every single day. But he clearly doesn't want to answer the question. And that makes me even more suspicious.
Okay, Debbie, thank you for that. Well, maybe he's got other things on his mind. So this headline perhaps starts to spell it out. So it's from Tories descend into infighting over claims Jeremy Hunt is plotting leadership bid if Boris Johnson is ousted. So this is where it starts to get interesting. We've got another one here. This is the Spectator back in January, but nevertheless, it's of interest. Will Jeremy Hunt be the next Prime Minister? The former Foreign Secretary can do better than a Portillo career. Well, that's pretty interesting. What does the man say himself? Jeremy Hunt, my leadership ambitions have not completely vanished. So this man is obviously is keen to see where he can take himself. Sorry, I've jumped ahead there. Keen to see where he can go. But in the background, of course, he's deeply involved in all matters to do with global health. Just give us your comments on how do you fancy Jeremy Hunt as Prime Minister?
I don't. I really, really don't. Actually, it completely terrifies me when I look back and see what he's been up to whilst he was Health Secretary. Because don't forget, he was Health Secretary from 2012 to 2018. And that was at the same time that I was at the Department of Health. So I bumped into him a couple of times in a corridor. But what he's been doing with regards to life sciences, as we'll see in a minute, and I'm sure you'll have comment on this, Brian, and Mike, with no blame, the no blame agenda that we're looking at. Clearly, Jeremy Hunt has a very clear agenda ahead of him. He's got aspirations of being Prime Minister, I'm absolutely sure. He went for the leadership before and came second against Boris Johnson. But, there's also been some misdemeanors that we mustn't forget with regards to Jeremy Hunt. He breached the anti-money laundering legislation in 2018 by failing to declare 50% in a property firm to Companies House within 28 days. He's been pictured hiding behind trees. He was involved in the massive junior doctors strike, if you remember. He also blamed Hillsborough on football hooliganism. He's got quite a history, and it would appear, I didn't know, but the name Jeremy apparently means appointed by God. And he's also a distant but direct descendant of the Queen, and he's also on the Privy Council. So he's very, very active, and I'm sure that we'll see a lot more of him in the coming weeks, especially as we've got elections in the next 24 hours, local elections. So maybe they're trying to oust Boris, and maybe we'll see a leadership bid sooner rather than later.
Okay, Debbie, thank you for that. Well, you've probably given us the key bit as to why we should be concerned about Jeremy Hunt. I'm going to bring up some slides quite quickly because we're tight for time at the moment. But of course, this man is putting himself on stage. We can see it here, saying that he is the man standing up to help world patient safety. It's no longer about safety in UK. You can see the the text here that this is part of the 6th annual World Patient Safety Science and Technology Summit. So he's very good at standing on the stage. He's not so good at answering questions put to him in person about patient safety when it's to do with vaccines. But we got more going on here because this is extremely interesting. This is from a blame culture to a learning culture. And this is about massive change, more change in the NHS, where we're going to make it safer by getting rid of anybody being guilty of doing anything wrong, as far as I can see. So small print for these, I know, but I'll go through them very quickly, and you can freeze the screen in order to take in what's being said in detail. Top left, it says, but to blame failures in care on doctors and nurses trying to do their best is to miss the point that bad mistakes can be made by good people. This is very interesting language here because you say, what happens when the brain surgeon makes mistakes? He learns by it, apparently, Mike, so that's good. The conclusion here, distinguished guest Karl Popper said, true ignorance is not the absence of knowledge, but the refusal to acquire it. So now is the time to use the power of intelligent transparency to make sure that we really do turn our healthcare systems into learning organizations and offer our patients the safe, high quality they deserve. So they're going to learn on the job training. That was back in 2016. Here's Jeremy Hunt talking about balancing risks with regard to vaccine blood clots. This is more about the information that he's putting out. So this is part of his patient safety weekly update, and you received this email, Debi. And then it brings us through to things like this. If you can just comment briefly on sodium valproate, I know you've picked up on in this material from Jeremy Hunt. Why were you concerned about what you saw there?
Well, while I was, I'm very glad that the sodium valproate made the agenda because, quite rightly, it's an extremely urgent issue. But what alarmed me was that, despite my having asked him about serious adverse reactions, if you look, if people freeze the screen on that shot, on the COVID news, they're talking about the COVID dashboard. They're talking about COVID mortality. There's no mention there of serious adverse reactions, and yet there could have been. So I wrote back to him immediately and asked why there was no inclusion of what I believe would be a priority question and an urgent question with regards to the serious adverse reactions. So there was just no mention of it on the agenda of the Patient Safety Committee at all.
Right. Okay. Now, Debi, you were very concerned, have been very concerned about the way that there's an explosion in size of the life sciences sector in UK. And what you're highlighting is the fact that the global pharmaceutical companies are getting closer and closer to government. So you'd picked up on this one here. This is going back to 2018, but it's talking about investments of 85 million in this sector. And then here we've got an organization called UCB, a global pharmaceutical company. We're now into the 150 million and the 200 million. This stuff is growing exponentially, and what we're seeing is a partnership where it's difficult to tell government and the pharmaceutical companies apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all I can say is that from where I'm sitting, it would appear that the UK has got great aspirations of being a superpower. And what no better area than life sciences. Only the problem is that the UK seem to be the population of the United Kingdom are being used as the lab rats for the rest of the world. So, we must remember that we're getting drugs rolled out courtesy of the MHRA, emergency approvals or conditional authorizations. We're getting them rolled out in the UK first in the world. Drugs like Valneva, drugs like Molnupiravir aren't being used anywhere else. They're being tested and primed here. So clearly, we seem to be lab central. for the whole of the planet. And this whole life sciences agenda is growing and growing and growing to the point where you're going to go out of your front door and on the industrial estate, maybe close to you, there'll be a biolab, or there'll be some other kind of biotech company, or a health facility, a health hub. The landscape's changing completely with regards to the UK life sciences.
Okay, Debbie, thank you for that. And we're going to end here with two very, very interesting little video clips. And the first one is talking about World Health. You founded it's Geneva 2022. Let's just have a little listen to what's being planned for us. And your point is that UK is absolutely at the lead of this new One World Health agenda.
Thank you, Olivia. So the following session will target the One Health approach. The 4 lead technical focal points of the quadripartite organizations will be formally together for the very first time in a public forum. They will be addressing the inclusion of environmental factors in a One Health approach and ultimately addressing the question, One Health, is there a paradigm shift? So before we get to it, the 4 directors of the organizations comprising the One Health quadripartite have sent their welcoming videos.
Colleagues, today's first plenary session of the Geneva Health Forum is an important step forward. As our world faces increased threats, the One Health approach is vital to ensure a collective and holistic response. If we do not take the action, these global challenges will have a devastating consequences on our planet, on our capacity to feed the world sustainably. We need a bold paradigm shift, embrace structural solutions with a strong emphasis on the upstream prevention. We need to rethink our relationship with our environment that connects us all and determines the health of people, planet, animals, and ecosystems. At FAO, we firmly believe that this paradigm shift is anchored in the transformation of world agri-food systems to make them more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable. This transformation promotes healthy ecosystems and inclusive socio-economic models, and is critical for achieving better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all, leaving no one behind. The One Health approach is the key to achieve this transformation, but we cannot do it alone. We need the collective combination of our knowledge, expertise, and innovative thinking. Together, we can unlock the transformative power of an ecosystem chain that will lead to health, social, economic, and environmental benefits. Considering that 60% of the emerging diseases are of animal origin, the One Health approach is essential for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, as well as for the other important action tracks such as antimicrobial resistance and combating neglected disease, and they still affect many low and middle-income countries.
So there we have it. It's to do with health, but when you actually listen to what the man says, everything is drawn together under one banner. And Debbie, as you've said, UK is at the lead. I'll just give you 20 seconds to reply on that one. I'd just like to get the Bill Gates video in for the end of the news today because it's so astonishing. But what did you pick up from that conference?
Well, it's a very interesting conference. Not many people are watching it. It's taking place at the moment. I caught a live session of it. But clearly you can see, all I need to say, Brian, is one world order, one world health. You know, One World Health says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yes, and UK is at the forefront of it. And of course, if it's One World Health, we need quality people, completely unqualified, of course, like Bill Gates, in order to tell us how to do things. Let's have a look at this video, which is presumably for adults.
If we make the right investments, we won't need to live in fear of another COVID. We can build a health system that is ready to stop outbreaks before they go global. Here is how it should work. Epidemiologists will detect suspicious clusters of a disease that could cause a pandemic. A global team of 3,000 disease experts managed by the WHO, called the Germ Team, will track the disease and share data and recommendations with governments. Governments and pharmaceutical companies will work together to use factories all over the world to get an unprecedented scale of diagnostics and vaccines very quickly. We'll have an agreed protocol and we'll understand how to share the results globally. Countries and the WHO will work in the best way to allocate these tools and to make sure that we have the logistics and delivery to get them to everyone who needs them. The key to be ready for a potential pandemic is to practice. And so this germ team will work with each country to do germ games, drills where you see, are you ready? Could you get the diagnostics out? So we're ready to go when we see the outbreak. Diseases are always going to spread among humans, but they don't have to become pandemics. You can read more about this in my new book, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic.
Of course, if you've helped create the pandemic, it must be pretty easy to write a book on how not to create the pandemic. Debi, we are very short of time, so I'm going to say thank you very much for that segment. We've a lot more to cover on the medical side, and we will do that in future UK column news editions. We're just going to end with this graphic, which I think has come from Alex.
Alex, yes.
There we are. In fact, 3 of my favorite memes, 5 seconds each. One is makes you feel old seeing these two growing up. On the left is the 1970s and 80s test card girl with her clown doll. And on the right is Boris Johnson with his latest paramour. Matt Hancock, and I won't reverse the M and the H. This is a parody account, so if you reverse them, you'll understand it's a parody account. His sock puppet says, I will be taking legal action against the original poster and anyone who posts this. You don't have free speech to say this, my lawyers are watching. What is the fake Matt Hancock afraid of? This meme by the artist David Art, Dayvidart. Hancock topped more pensioners than Harold Shipman, and he has a broader grin on his face than the famous murdering doctor. Finally, Mr. Bean appears in a cornfield, trying to find his directions, and the meme text is, I'm trying to follow the science, capital T, capital S, but it keeps leading me back to the money, capital T, capital M.
Yes. Very good.
Excellent. Well, I think that sums it up. We are out of time, so we're going to say thank you very much to Alex, Vanessa and Debi for joining us today. Thank you to our audience. A very big thank you to everybody who's supporting the UK column. We will be back for an extra time shortly. I'm just checking because we're over our normal time, and of course we will also be seeing you on Friday. So thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.